Okay, so welcome back to my channel. So we have made it to the final episode of the Netflix series, The Haunting of Bly Manor, The Beast in the Jungle. And, you know, I'm not really sure how I feel about this episode. Maybe I just expected something more, something different. I don't know. But, okay, so we're just going to get into this. So, Hannah is back in the kitchen, just like, the first time she met Owen, and she's, talking to who she believes to be Owen, but, it's herself. And she's going through, Dominic is dead, Charlotte is dead, Rebecca and Peter is dead, and I'm dead. And you can see Owen, or her idea of Owen, he's sitting there, and he's, they started talking, and they focused on this door behind her, and that's cracked, and she's afraid to go through, and then she finally tells Owen that how much she loves him, and how she wish she would have said something sooner. And he said, and he was saying that she has to go back and help them, and she was afraid, of what might happen once she walks through the door. And he was like, "You can't let fear. You're not a selfish person, and so you can't let fear stop you from doing what's right." And so we flash to Dani and the lady in the lake that we now know to be Viola. And of course, she's still dragging Dani. And I'm like, wait a minute. Is it me, or did it seem like it took far less time for her to kill Peter? So Dani is still dragging Dani up to the house. You can still hear Flora screaming in the background. Hannah appears, basically telling her to stop. Obviously, she can't really do too much. And she just walked right on through Hannah on into the house. She drags Dani down the hall into which would have been Dominic and Lord and Lady Wingrave's room. She stops at the bed. She see that the bed is empty, and then you see Flora. She jumps up on the bed. And Flora is begging her, please, stop, don't hurt her. Please let her go. Please, this whole thing. And she's having this flashback of, this is Viola's having this flashback of her daughter sitting there on the bed. So she released Dani. And then you can see Viola as herself. And she, grabs her daughter and picks her up. And now she's singing. And you can see her now walking out of the room. And of course, it then flashed to present day, where she's picked up Flora, and she's now taking Flora out of the house. Dani is, has been strangled, being choked this whole time. So she wasn't in a position to kind of jump up and stop her. And even if she did, I'm not even sure how much, what she could have done in that moment. And so you flash to Miles. And it looked like Miles was laying on the ground or something, but until the lady in the lake walks past with Viola, and you see Rebecca and Miles standing there. And you see Flora, she's screaming for Rebecca to help her, and Rebecca is, just standing there. And then Miles, aka Peter, turns to her and was like, I tried to help you, gave you a way out, and now you're about to let it drown, and this whole thing. And then next a car's pulling up. It's Henry, and he kind of saw someone carrying Flora, and you could hear Flora screaming. And he runs behind, he's trying to catch up to whoever this person is, because he's trying to get Flora. She chokes him, throws him to the ground. Next thing you know, he's laying there, and then you can see him staring at his body on the ground. Obviously, Flora is still screaming. Dani has now made her way out of the house. She's trying to get through the graveyard to reach them before she get to the lake and kill Flora. And so at this point, a car pulls up. It's Jamie and Owen. Hannah appears to let them know that at first she had asked why they were there, because she was afraid. And then Owen said that for some reason that he and Jamie both had nightmares or something, and it prompted them to jump in the car and come to the house. And Hannah tells him that you need to get down to the lake, they need your help. And so next you hear Flora scream. Jamie runs off, and for a minute Owen turns away and turns back, and he realized that Hannah is no longer there, so he runs over. He's running now to the lake to help out. So we flash back to the lake with Viola. She's carrying Flora, and Rebecca is behind her, and Rebecca's still asking, and Flora's still asking Rebecca to help her out, and she was like, and Rebecca's basically telling her, just allow me in, and I'll go through this part for you, and just let me take over here. And I guess, Rebecca felt like it was inevitable that she was going to kill. There wasn't really nothing she could do to stop it, except she would possess Flora for the amount of time it took this whole thing to go, for things to end, and so that Flora didn't experience that. And so Flora, she did, and you see Flora, she opens her eyes, and she's now with her mom. Her mom is like, tucking her in, and it was a really, an intimate a little cute moment between her and her mom. Dani shows up, and she eventually, as she runs into the water, and then the storyteller is saying that for some unknown reason, she decided to say, I guess, the words that Miles and Flora said to let Peter and Rebecca in, like, it's you, it's me, it's us, this whole thing. And then Viola turns around and walks back towards Dani, and she stopped, and you can kind of see Dani kind of in this trance, and then the screen kind of goes dark. So then it goes back to Owen. Owen is trying to resuscitate Henry, and then you hear Rebecca say, "Do you feel that?" And so you see Owen look up, and the look on his face, it clearly shows that he can actually see Rebecca, right? And then you flash to, at this point, Henry is he's hovering between life and death. And so Hannah starts talking to him, and basically wants him to pass on the message to Owen, saying that she's sorry, that she loves him, and that her body's at the bottom of the well. And before she could finish, Owen was able to resuscitate Henry, and you see Miles waking up. He had passed out or whatever, and then you see Peter standing off to the side, basically apologizing to Miles. Miles obviously looks pissed, and next thing you know, Peter disappears. So the next time we see Flora, Dani is holding Flora. Jamie shows up. She runs into the water to kind of help her, and you can kind of see that Dani is like having some type of panic attack. She's kind of hyperventilating, and Jamie is trying to calm her down. It's like, it's okay. Everything's going to be fine. And, they had this whole moment. Henry shows up. Miles and Flora runs over to hug him. And unfortunately, that's when Owen realized that Hannah wasn't there. And he's like, wait a minute, where's Hannah? Where's Hannah? And you kind of see the concerned look on his face. And then you see that the next morning, you can see Jamie and Owen standing over the well, and they can clearly see Hannah at the bottom of the well, which of course was a very emotional moment. Of course, they loved Hannah, especially Owen, and on top of and this happening on top of him burying his mom not too long ago, and so he was just it was just bad. It was all bad. So while this is going on, you can see, I don't know how much time has passed since then, but you can see that the house is being packed up, and Dani and not Dani, Henry is showing Miles how to tie a bow tie, and he was telling him how his father had helped, taught him, and he was telling him, he also showed him how to sew patches on his clothes, and they was like, well, I didn't know Dad knew how to sew, and Flora asked if he could show her how to sew patches on things, and of course he agreed, and they're clearly, their relationship, you can see it heading in a positive direction. And of course they started asking, so do you know any more stories about our dad? And of course he was like, oh, I have tons of stories, right? And then you flash to the chapel where Owen is lighting a candle for Hannah, and the storyteller is basically saying, when they removed her body from the well that he had rode with them all the way to the coroner's office. He actually bathed her and, prepared her, and he basically never left her side until they buried her. And that was sad. You just feel so bad for them. And so Dani is in her room. She's supposed to be packing, but you can see she's kind of in a daze. And Jamie walks in and asks if she's okay and if she needs help. And then she starts talking about the beast in the jungle. And that's basically how she described Viola. Was like, I just feel like she's always waiting for that other shoe to drop. She allowed Viola in, and she's like, I always feel like she's just beneath the surface. Like she's just watching and waiting. And, I just don't know, what's going to happen and when she's going to make an appearance, and so she's terrified. And so, of course, Jamie's there to reassure her, like, basically he's reassuring her that she's going to be there for her and that she's not going anywhere. And, they eventually, all get together as, Jamie, Dani, Henry, Miles, and Flora. They're saying their goodbyes. Henry saying that they're going to go to America. And I think Dani and Jamie basically initially said they would go there for a little while, but they were going to make a life there. And so they said their goodbyes and they jumped in the car, and the next you see them at a diner, and they're just talking about what their next destination is going to be. And Jamie started talking about Christmas, and of course Dani is forlorn because she's like, that's too far ahead in the future. We don't really know what's going to happen. And and James was like, the only thing we can do is take it one day at a time. And that's what everybody has to do, regardless of, what's going on in their life. We just take it one day at a time. And, if we get there, we get there. And if we don't, we don't. And so you see that they, opened a shop. And you see Jamie, she tells Dani that she has a surprise for her, and she puts a moonflower up on the counter. And of course Dani's like, those are extremely rare. And they started talking, and the whole significance of the moonflower, you would have to go back to like the bonfire episode where Jamie started talking about that particular flower and the meaning of it. And it was she had this whole monologue about this flower and that whole thing. So you would have to go back to that to find out why that flower is significant to them. And basically Jamie was like, I gave you this flower because, we've been together for a while, and it's been a year at this point. So a year has gone by. They seem to be extremely happy. And, even though this thing is like hanging over their head, they've still been able to find some happiness and build a life together. And so she was like, well, I don't hate you. And, basically telling her how much she loves her and the whole thing. And so it kind of moves forward. So now another 5 years go by. And they've pretty much, settled into life and, their relationship. And they're happy. And it seemed like, their business is doing great. And it seemed like everything is, moving forward. And then one day, Dani is walking to the shop, and she can see her reflection in the glass door, and she can see Viola. And of course that stopped her in her tracks, because I think that's when she realized, okay, it's starting now. And it's been like 5 or 6 years, okay? So she makes her way upstairs with this plant, and Jamie turns around and is like, well, what is that? She's like, oh, someone left it on the street, and I thought maybe you could help it. And she put the plant down, and Jamie, she's pulling the plant out so she can see like the roots and the whole thing, and then she can see a ring at the bottom of the pot. And at this point, it's like in the 80s, late 80s, maybe early 90s, has to be like the early 90s going to the mid 90s. And she was like, well, because at this point legally they can't marry, and so we can still have the rings as, symbolic and the whole thing. And they, it was it was a nice moment for them. And so you see they're at Owen's restaurant, and they're having wine, and he's congratulating them on their union. And, they're sitting and talking for a while, and Jamie asks about Henry and the kids, and Owen is, telling them about, how they're doing well. And at this point, they would be teenagers at this point. And so while they're talking, the waiter came over to refill Dani's glass, and she could see a reflection in the pitcher, and she could see the woman's face. And so she got really quiet and concerned. You could still kind of hear the conversation going on. And then Owen tells them that, I think Jamie was the one that asked him about Bly Manor, asked him if the kids, how the kids were coping with Bly Manor. And he was basically like, they don't remember any of it. As far as they're concerned, Bly Manor was their summer home. They stayed there for a time when they were kids. They barely remember Hannah. The only thing they know about Hannah, they can remember about Hannah, is that she lived there with them. But all that other stuff, they don't remember any of that stuff. And so you can kind of see Dani and Jamie kind of looking concerned, like, how they don't remember any of it. And then they, realize that maybe, it's for the best. Like, you've had these young kids that went through so much trauma, and you find out, they come out on the other side, obviously not remembering a lot of that stuff, which has afforded them the opportunity to have somewhat of a normal, healthy life. Henry still remembers what happened, but the kids don't. And so I guess later that night or whenever they're doing dishes, Dani is kind of quiet. She's asking Dani if she's okay, and then Dani sees the reflection again, and she jumps back, and the glass breaks all over the floor. And then Dani finally tells Jamie that she's been seeing this woman and how she feels like she's being lost and this whole thing. And of course, Jamie is there every step of the way to reassure her that you're okay, you're here, we're fine, everything is fine. And it's just like I said, they've been dreading this day. So Jamie comes home one day with their paperwork, I guess, to confirm their civil partnership or something to that effect. And she can see that there's water running all over the floor. So of course she goes to the bathroom, and you can see Dani. Dani is looking at her reflection in the tub, and she was just so out of it that the water continued to run and the tub overflowed. So that's why the water was running out into the hall. Now, if that had been her neighbor and that water started coming down into my apartment, which I have experienced, I'd have been up there cussing her ass out. But okay, but this is the movies. But all this water is running out into the hallway, right? And so Jamie goes in and she's saying, I keep seeing her. I feel like, every day I feel like I'm fading more and more. And then I'm starting to see her more and more. And Jamie's telling her, well, no, all I see is you. And, you're fine. And Dani is saying how tired she is. And how sometimes she just feels like she just wants to give in. And, of course, Jamie doesn't want that because she loves Dani. And, but, she's doing the best that she can. So later that night, it seemed like, they were resting, and Dani has this dream of Jamie is standing there looking at the reflection in the water. Next, a hand comes out of nowhere and starts strangling Jamie. And then you wake up and you see this hand near Jamie's neck, and you realize it's Dani. So at that point, she realized that she could not put it off anymore, because she felt, at this point, it's progressing to the point where she could really injure or kill Jamie. And so Jamie woke up that morning and found the notes, and Dani was gone, and so she went to Bly Manor to find Dani, and she went to the lake. She went into the lake, and unfortunately, that's when she saw Dani dead at the bottom of the lake. And the storyteller is basically saying that Dani is now the lady of the lake, and how Jamie wanted Dani to pull her down, and so she could be there forever with her. But Dani was different, and she would never hurt Jamie. And of course, it was an extremely emotional scene. And she also talked about how Dani basically spent the rest of her life waiting. Jamie spent the rest of her life waiting for Dani to return. She would always look, for her reflection in water and in the mirror and the whole thing. And then we flash back to the manor where, the storyteller is sitting with the wedding guests and pretty much wrapping up the story. And so, of course, they're all sitting around like, oh my goodness. Like, it was just because she was like, I told you it wouldn't be a short story. And they kind of chuckled a little bit. And one of the women said, so is that a true story? And of course, the storyteller is saying, what part? She was like, so if I was to go to London, if I was to go to England and go to Bly Manor, would I see Dani walking the property? And she basically said that no such place exists and da-da-da-da. And actually, let me back up a little bit. She did talk about how as time went on, Dani started to go through the same changes as Viola, where her memory started to fade and her features started to fade and, that whole thing. And so now, she's like, oh, no such place as Bly Manor exists. And, they talked for a little while and eventually, it's like, well, it's late. The wedding was the next day. And so people are like, we need to go and get some rest. But everybody left except the bride. And so they sat up and talked for a few more minutes. And the bride started telling her about, how she loved her soon-to-be husband and how, one thing that concerns her a lot when they're just sitting there in their comfortable silence that you can only experience with someone that you really care about is that she always has this fear of losing him and what her life would be like without him. And she got emotional, and the storyteller was telling her that, you guys will hopefully have many years together. And when that day comes, because, it's something that we all have to experience. I mean, the only thing it's going to be difficult, but the only thing that you can hold on to are the memories. And, it's going to, and the memories is going, you always think there's going to be these important, like, milestones in your life, but sometimes it's going to be the most silliest thing that you could ever think of. And, it's going to keep the person, in your mind. And, it's just something that you have to go through. And so they hug. And as she was about to go to bed, she turned, she said, at first, I thought that you were telling a story. And then she revealed, this is the bride, she said, my middle name is Flora. And so the storyteller said, oh, is it? And so they said their good nights. And so next day we're at the wedding, and you can kind of see the storyteller turning around. She's kind of watching the bride in their room dance. And then you flash to the guy and this young man who was standing across at the table, who at one time was looking at her kind of crazy, like he was upset with her for some reason. And then you realize who these people actually were. So you can see them, and then of course a couple pass, and then you can see that's actually Owen and Miles. And so then you see the older guy. It was initially an older guy and who came over to dance with the bride, and then you realize that it's Henry and Flora. And then you flash back to the storyteller, and the storyteller is Jamie. So I can't say that I was pleasantly surprised. I don't even want to say I was surprised, but that was a nice little setup there. I was like, oh, okay, so that's Owen and Miles. Okay, so as the wedding ended, she left. She went back to her room, and she kind of went through her night routine. She would fill the tub up with water. She would fill the sink up with water, and like all these years, she's been waiting for Dani to return. She would crack the door. She would sit in her chair, and that's where she would sleep. And the next thing you saw was a hand on her shoulder. And that is basically how this episode ends. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not really sure. Am I super disappointed? I'm not. But is it what I was expecting? It wasn't. I'm just gonna be honest with you. It really wasn't. But let me know in the comment section if you've made it through the entire series. Let me know, your perspective on certain things, and how, if you like the way it ended, or if you wish it had ended a different way, or what your expectations were. You can leave all that in the comment section. I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.